Welcome to Jargon, a podcast bringing clarity to commonly misunderstood business concepts. We're debunking and simplifying the buzzwords and ideas plaguing today's business world and offering a fresh perspective on these topics. Hi, this is Peter Purcell.
And Bill Aimone here.
We're recording another podcast for Trinergy. So it seems like based on our last podcast, we may have added one more listener.
Yes, we have 4 now.
That's amazing. So what do we want to talk about today?
Well, I want to talk about how do we get more listeners?
That would be cool. Maybe what we do is we talk more about a topic that our 4 listeners might be interested in, like ERP.
Let's talk about ERP. We haven't talked about that in a while.
That's true. So one of the thoughts that I had, I was thinking about this over the last week is, when you start thinking about different companies, ERP is kind of a pain to implement and it can be expensive. So, when you think about what are the benefits of an ERP, and then when you think about different types of companies, how important is it for them to actually invest in something like this?
Yeah, because a lot of companies who are maybe looking at an ERP system, or maybe they're fast growing, or they've grown to a point where they think they need one, or maybe they already have one and they need to upgrade, or they need a better one, or whatever. Right. It's always a lot of money. It's never cheap. And we talk to a lot of prospective companies out there that want to do business with us, and we're giving them kind of an overview of what it takes to put an ERP system in, not just the hardware costs, but the resource and people costs and the commitment to it. It can be daunting.
It can be. So I'm going to focus us a little bit more on the company size question, because when I look at larger companies, 500 million above or even beyond, it's almost a no-brainer. You have to have an ERP. The company's so big, you have to have an ERP to help manage your business, understand what's going on and stuff like that. I think if we were to step it down a notch and talk about high growth, smaller companies, when should they invest? And what are the characteristics of those companies, when they make that decision?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And the way I look at it is if you simplify it, okay, and there's different called hybrids of it, but you've got family-run businesses, right, which are closely held by a family or two. Then you've got private equity-owned businesses, which may be owned partially by a family. Maybe it's bought from a family, but it's owned by a private equity firm. That private equity firm actually has funds that have additional investors, and then it's publicly traded. So that's those.
So those would be the 3.
And that's maybe even a start, because most companies get started by somebody, an individual or family. Then it gets private equity. Then private equity turns it to go public.
Right. So when is it the appropriate time to implement an ERP? Kind of. That's one of the questions. And then what are the characteristics? Why would you get pushed over the edge essentially to go down this path? Because an ERP is great. I mean, it provides controls. It done right, you have the information you need to run the business. Done right, your bankers love it, your auditors love it, your shareholders love it, because the view into the company is almost real time, and you can make decisions to change processes, go in and out of markets. I mean, there's just a lot of benefits to a well-implemented ERP.
Right. To put it differently, really, an ERP automates processes, gives you better information, and gives you controls as a company.
Perfect.
And so if you look at those things and you say, okay, I've got automated processes, I've got better information, I've got controls, just simply put, okay, there's probably other things out there in those categories, and you go, okay, well, who does that benefit and who does that help? Because when you buy an ERP system, you can't just go, well, just give me the process. I don't need the controls and I don't need the information.
It's all in.
It's all in. So the benefit of the ERP system is all 3 of those. You can't
divorce them.
For example, if you decide you're putting an ERP system in, you can't say, you know what, we need to have an open security where anybody can do anything. You can't do that, because then it messes up the process.
Exactly.
And so I think a lot of organizations struggle with this, going, wait a minute, we have to have segregation of duties and controls and process and information. All that stuff goes hand in hand in the system. I can't do one without the other. ERP is expensive. Then you go, if I look at the 3 types of companies and go, okay,
what are their needs?
What are their needs and who are the constituents? So let's just start out, because we talked about the family run, number 1,
private equity owned,
and public owned. Let's start with family owned.
So let's start there. I mean, what are your thoughts? Because typically most family-owned businesses, to be running successfully, probably already have a system in place.
Have something
in place. And they could even be running their business on Excel spreadsheets and QuickBooks. So why would they move to an ERP? What would potentially drive them? Or maybe it's not necessary.
Well, so then the question is who does it benefit? Who does it help? Who does an ERP system help? So if I look at the three components, controls, information, and automating processes, and then I look about who in a family-run business, really you have three main constituents. You got the family who owns the business. You got internal management, which might be the same as the family or part of the family. And then you've got maybe bankers, lenders who are lending you money where you have to provide receivable information for debt covenants or something like that. So really those are your three main constituents. You might have an audit firm that comes in and makes sure your financial statements are good, but they're not going in and auditing controls or doing any type of testing of controls or anything like that. They're just going and doing I'll call it a basic audit to make sure the family's comfortable with the financial statements and there's not any mistakes in their Excel spreadsheets or QuickBooks system.
Right. So if I think about those constituents and I start with the family, I'm sitting there going, if they're a family-owned business, they know how the business is being run.
Typically, they grew
understand.
the business.
They grew the business.
And they might even have family members who work throughout the business, and that's their control. Is they got family members working in the company. I got one of the family members is the plant manager. Another one's the treasurer. Another one's the inventory manager. Maybe the grandson runs one of the stores or something.
So in general, they're going to run it to the benefit of the family, right? So from a quote-unquote controls perspective, not that big a deal, I would think.
No, it's really not. And then you think about that aspect of it. And largely, there's this whole management by wandering around. A lot of family members, they're just going to kind of wander around the offices and talk to people. That's their control mechanism. They got good senses. Call them spidey senses for knowing if something's not right because they grew it's their baby. They can walk into one of their plants and see something odd and go, wait a minute, that doesn't look right. And that's their control mechanism. So they really don't need an ERP system to tell them people are doing the right things at the right time. We got the right segregation of duties. And by the way, with their large control is they look at the bank account and they go, hey, what's that check for?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. They're probably involved in every aspect of money coming in, money going out. And so if they do need an ERP, maybe to support bankers or lenders requirements.
Which is pretty simple. It's going to be
QuickBooks or
accounts receivable balances or accounts payable balances or inventory, list or something like that, or even asset list. But the other piece of this, so you look at controls and you think about information, even if a family-run business is, let's say their cost accounting information isn't all that accurate, it doesn't account for, in-between month inventory changes, and maybe it's not perfect, they kind of got a sense for, hey, things are going well, we've got revenue, we've got a pipeline of business, we're keeping costs under control, I'm watching the bank accounts, we're okay. They're not going to worry about the month-to-month or even a quarterly demand from an outside person saying, what are your quarterly profits? Why did they go down?
So potentially a small need, unless the business is highly complex, with so many moving parts that even a family member may not be able to.
Yeah, or it's become so massive, and they've gone global or something like that. Yeah.
But so low need. But then if we move on to PE-owned company, Bill, and, there's potentially massive amounts of money being invested in that company. And there's always a plan to go to the third category that you talked about, which was, public. So you're going to need exactly what we just described, plus what?
Well, if you think about a private equity firm, their constituents are more than just internal management, family, and bankers. Yeah, there might be some family involved still. There's internal management that needs information. There's bankers that need information. There's investors in the private equity funds.
And even joint venture partners potentially.
Yeah, so we've got investors. I've got, like you said, joint venture partners. And then there's other board members. There might be independent board members or people who are part of the private equity firm or someone who owns another fund. So there's other complexities. But then there's also, with those complexities come requirements to do some level of additional audits beyond your typical, I'm auditing the books to make sure the financial numbers are right. But there's also some control audits being put in place, not to the extent of Sarbanes-Oxley, but maybe Sarbanes-Oxley light type audits that are required to have some process in place. So for example, my ERP system needs to have good security. My ERP system needs to have good control so that someone can't go in and make an adjustment to the general ledger without an audit trail.
Right. And then when you start thinking about procurement, going out spending money, you want to be able to track everything from a PO. This is no longer I'm just doing this off of a big chief tablet, with a number 2 pencil kind of thing.
What did you order? What did
I order? Did I get it? Am I paying it on term? Am I, getting all the discounts?
Did I capitalize it properly?
Did I capitalize it properly? I mean, these are all things that I would suggest that, all these constituents are going to want to know. And then on top of that, I would suggest maybe, or what do you think about this suggestion, is that if you are going to get ready to move into the next category, which puts a lot of kind of limelight on you, don't you want to put a foundation in place to get ready for that?
Yeah, but even before that, I mean, because there's some private equity firms that tend to hold the company as private equity.
That's fair.
In a lot of cases, these private equity firms have bought these companies. They don't know as much operationally about the business as the family member knows. And so they're asking a lot more questions and a lot of unpredictable questions. So that ERP system needs to have information in there to be able to, and we talked about margins earlier. Why did margins go up by 0.5% from last month? Management can't explain that stuff. The private equity firm looks at management going, do you know what's going on?
Right.
Do you understand your business?
And so the ERP will help internal management be able to tell the story,
and
right?
Say, hey,
tell
look,
the story.
It's because of price erosion in this particular area, this market, and this is what we're doing about it to address it, and this is what it's going to look like going forward. And so I've got a lot of needs to be able to manage margins, manage my return on assets, and be able to provide the forward-looking metrics so that private equity has confidence in management to keep them around. Because, again, private equity, they have owners, which are the investors in the private equity firm that they have to report to, and so they have to give them confidence that things are running properly.
Well, yeah, because, the private equity firm has a remit to make money for the people that have put money into the fund, right?
Exactly.
So there's positive rate of return. And then often when you start talking about internal management, when you compare that to the internal management at a family-owned business, the family-owned business internal management probably been there forever. Whereas when you get a private equity investment, oftentimes they bring in new management who then have all sorts of new questions and new points of view. You need an ERP to be able to support that.
Yeah, and also what's happening in the private equity world, I'll call it that growth equation, all of a sudden accelerates, because not only am I growing a business through growth internally, but it's external growth. They might be throwing together 4 companies together and having them operate as one, and now they need to be consistent. How do I get that consistency? I put an ERP system in to drive that consistency. There's a lot more at stake with private equity, but then you were kind of alluding to that third category of publicly owned, where now all of a sudden we're in a whole new ball game.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because for a private equity company that's not going to buy and hold, right? Because most really buy and want to IPO to make money for their constituents, their investors. So let's talk about a publicly held company and the difference between a publicly held company, the needs, regulations, etc., and constituents versus like a family owned.
Yeah, so depending upon what your market capitalization are, whether you're an accelerated filer or an emerging growth company, there's different requirements. But there's a thing called Sarbanes-Oxley that has been around for a little over 20 years. And those requirements require not only for management to sign off on the book saying that they believe that the financial statements are accurate, or I go to jail if they're not. They're putting their livelihood on the line, or life on the line, essentially, for the company. But then in addition to that, I've got a set of SOX 404 controls that I've got to put in place and a framework I've got to put in place. If you don't have a robust ERP system,
it's almost impossible.
It's very difficult. And I look at companies that have maybe less mature ERP systems, or ERP systems that just do a part of what the business does. Their control environment is very manual. So they have to do a lot of manual things to be able to prove out to their auditors, who then report to the board that they are SOX 404 compliant. And it becomes a huge effort to be able to prove, do I have the security in place? Think about all the IT security controls you got to put in place, the controls over financial reporting. All that goes all the way back to operations. How is operations booking inventory? Where are they putting stuff? Where are my assets going? Who's doing what? Who has authority to do what? All of that needs to be documented and then validated by your auditors every year. And if you don't have a decent system to do that, I've got a whole other constituent here called, the shareholders,
the public shareholders.
And these might be other institutions. They might be
individuals,
retirement funds. They'll come in and say, wait a minute, you don't have the right controls. We're dumping your stock. And all of a sudden, the company doesn't exist anymore. So there's a lot on the line for a publicly traded company.
Right. So, again, in a case like that, having a good ERP, it helps you manage your delegation of authority, segregation of duties, gives you consistent processes, and repeatable processes. It just supports all those things, information that you need to run the business, all those things that are required to fulfill exactly what you just talked about.
Exactly. And so you start thinking about that. And of course, we didn't even touch on process improvement and cost reduction and how an ERP system helps with that.
Just continuous improvement.
But adding all those things together, and you take it all the way from a family-run company all the way to public, the business case for spending millions of dollars on an ERP system becomes a lot easier for a private equity or publicly traded company. But for a family-run company, it's difficult to justify.
It can be, yes.
Now, the only caveat is, let's say the family-run company says, you know what, we believe that if we have the right controls and the right things in place, we can then sell it or take it public someday, or take it private equity. That case, that builds a business case for the ERP. But if they're going to be running it as a family-run company for a while and they plan to, that business case for an ERP becomes very difficult. And that's why a lot of companies, we have a lot of people who are executives and they've grown with the company and they've become, maybe they're family-run and now they're public. They have a hard time understanding, why do we need to spend millions of dollars on an ERP? I know what's going on in my business, but all these other constituents come into play. Then you go, wait a minute, we need to do something.
Yeah, that's fair. So, Bill, I really do appreciate you taking time to do this podcast today.
Well, I appreciate you appreciating me. That's so nice of you. Given that this is my job, I'm like, I got to do this. If I don't, our marketing team will get mad at us. Peter and I have been given a remit to do at least 2 podcasts this year. This is our second one.
There we go. So we're done.
No, we're not.
Oh, okay.
We actually, I meant 2 a month.
2 a month. 2 a week, I thought.
Well, 2 this week.
2 this week. All right. Well, thank y'all, and y'all have a great day.